This is Lauren Burke, and this is Lauren Live. And on this edition, we're going to talk about the Washington Post. I actually think the Washington Post is out of business, unofficially out of business. I can't imagine how it becomes the Washington Post that it used to be before Jeff Bezos showed up. And now that he's cut like three or 400 people, it's going to be hard to figure out how that ever, you know, is recovered. I don't know how it is recovered. I don't think it can be. I'm going to play a little bit of the open of this show, Lauren Live, and then I'll come back to an interview that Marty Baron, who was the executive editor when the Post was last successful. He was the executive editor. He also wrote a book that I actually listened to. It was quite good. And actually, I met Marty Baron at Politics and Prose when he was touring that book. At any rate, I'm going to go over a little interview he did with The Atlantic a few days ago. I'm just going to play a little bit of the intro and I'll be back in a minute. Okay, the question is legacy journalism dead? Is it gone? We see CBS getting destroyed by Donald Trump and his friends. CNN would appear to be a target as well. His friends also have gone after and taken over TikTok. Of course, TikTok is not legacy journalism, but the point is there's a dismantling of traditional journalism, and the Washington Post has been the latest and largest target. Pretty amazing what happened a few weeks ago. It was like 2 weeks ago, laying off 300 people. I think everybody in journalism understands the business model is, in fact, failing. Everybody understands how difficult it is to make money. But for a big place like the Post, it does have a lot of subscribers. You'd think that they would have figured it out in some way, shape, or form. Marty Baron did do an interview with The Atlantic. I want to go over some of the things that he said. And that interview, I think it was 4 days ago. We're 4 days out, or actually, no, 2 days out from the State of the Union, which is Tuesday. A lot going on there. I'll say at the end of the show what I think I'm planning to do for State of the Union. But for right now, let's look at a bit of this interview with Marty Baron with the folks over at The Atlantic.
Welcome back. Thank you
for
being here.
Absolutely.
So the cuts happened on February 4th. Right. Said to be 1/3 of the journalists at the Post, but your former colleague Paul Farhi, reporting in the Washingtonian, says it may have been between 44 and 48% of journalists at the Post who were cut. Is that your understanding also?
I think it's about right, maybe about 40-45%. I'm not sure.
Extraordinary. So
like half the paper, otherwise known as half of the staff of the newspaper. And as somebody who has actually worked at the Post for about 6 months, back in when Len Downey was the executive editor, this is back in like 2005, 2006. I was only there for 6 months. I was just filling in for somebody on maternity. They did offer me a job at the end of that stint. And frankly, I was making more as a freelancer than that job paid. So I didn't take it. But at any rate, that was when the Post was in the old building on Rhode Island Avenue. They're now on K Street in Washington, D.C., a sort of new modern building. One wonders what they're going to do with that space if they cleared out half of the staff. As somebody that has worked there briefly and has several friends who've worked there, and have dealt with them as a crisis manager, have gone up against the Washington Post. Many of the journalists I had to go up against were laid off or have taken the buyout. It is a very interesting situation. To me, this means the Post is gone. The Post is dead. I don't know why we're not telling the truth in saying that, because I don't know how else you would define it. I mean, the Post as we knew it is gone.
International reporting, sports, books, metro coverage, staff photography among the areas of the paper's journalism either eliminated outright or gutted. You put out a statement that said, following the cuts, in part, this ranks among the darkest days in the history of one of the world's greatest news organizations. You also referred to it as a case of near instant, self-inflicted brand destruction. Say more about that.
Wow.
We'll just sit here for 30 minutes and let you talk. Go ahead.
Generally, I'm a master of understatement, but I guess I wasn't in that instance.
Yeah, tell us what you really think.
Right. Well, first of all, don't you think you should have had an uplifting portion of this program?
No.
I mean,
We don't do
seriously,
uplifting, sorry.
I'm like, I bring you down even below the level you were just at.
Yeah.
So, look, I mean, the Post has a great history. It has a great heritage. It goes back 150 years, just about.
Right.
And it has a long established mission of holding government to account and giving the American public the information it needs. It had set very high ambitions for itself, which I think it should do. And I think a lot of that has come to an end. So it's no longer setting high ambitions for itself.
Yeah. There is no way you can operate that newspaper the same as you did with 300, with half the staff. Now at first they were reporting that it was a third of the staff. Now we're hearing in this report that it's half of the staff. Let's think about that for a second. Half of the staff has been eliminated. 45%, almost half of the staff. I actually think they were struggling well before that. I certainly understood that in 2019 when they failed to investigate what happened to Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax in a Me Too story, that they just didn't investigate it. And I remember thinking, how is it that you put something in the paper that you didn't investigate? But that's exactly what they did, because the paradigm has now become about traffic, web traffic, rather than accuracy and rather than full reporting. And nobody wants to spend the money and the time to do that.
It may have been between 44 and 48% of journalists
below the level you were just at.
Yeah.
So setting high ambitions for itself. I think it has betrayed its with this action and with the behavior of the owner, who previously was a good owner but has somehow changed. It has betrayed the core values, I believe, of the institution. I believe that the newsroom is continuing to do really excellent work, and I commend them for it. They've done it under the most difficult circumstances in so many different ways. But I think that this represents an incredibly sad, dispiriting moment for the Post, and I worry that that the owner, neither the owner nor the current CEO, have established sort of a mission for the organization or laid out a strategy for recovering from this.
Yeah.
There is no strategy and there is no mission. And as I was saying to a really good friend of mine at lunch the other day, there are no rules in journalism. It's just that anything goes. And the First Amendment allows anybody to be a journalist, anybody who throws up a Substack and say they're a journalist. There are no rules in the profession and no barriers of entry, no licensure, nothing. So anybody can get into the profession, which means it's anything goes. And once it becomes anything goes, it's kind of over in terms of what the profession of journalism really means. I mean, I think a lot of people understand what it should mean and what it should look like, but what it actually is what matters. Reality is what matters, not theories or anything else.
I want to unpack all of that in the time that we have, but I want to begin with my colleague and your former colleague, Ashley Parker's piece in The Atlantic, which described this as the murder of the Washington Post. You told me I don't like that word murder. Right?
Yeah, nonviolent. I mean, I think the murder. Yeah, I mean, it's doing huge damage to the Post. I worry that it might send it into a death spiral.
Yeah.
But the Post is still there.
Murder has finality to it, doesn't it?
Last I saw, yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, good point,
Yeah.
Evan.
Thank you.
Right. I mean, the Post is still there. I think there's still many talented people at the Post. I mean, I think one thing that comes out of this is just how deep the reservoir of talent at the Post has been. And there's still many talented people there, and I would expect them to continue to do really.
And it was 7 months in, correct? The paper was
Right.
The paper was sold.
That's correct.
Right. You wrote a whole book about your time at the Post and were very complimentary of Jeff Bezos' ownership of the Post and treatment of you and protection.
And that's one of the weird things. I actually read his book, or I listened to his book. I really thought that he was oddly sort of favorable to Bezos in a big way. The book was called Collision of Power: Trump, Bezos, and the Washington Post. I thought he was pretty complimentary of Jeff Bezos, which is interesting to think about because, you know, that to me kind of doesn't make sense. The guy that he worked with, who has now frankly destroyed this paper. I mean, I don't know how you can, unless Kara Swisher can convince, or Michael Bloomberg can convince Jeff Bezos to sell the Washington Post. This thing is dead. This project is dead. It'll never be what it was. Now you notice the Washington Post is starting to republish duplicate stories, which is just weird. I mean, that is just strange, but that's what they're doing. They're republishing duplicate stories that they ran years ago. And that's weird in itself, but they don't have now the staff to execute the journalism that they need to execute. And I think, like a lot of people, I couldn't believe some of the people that they got rid of, because they got several people on that staff that were quite good that they got rid of, that I was like, really? And some of them were younger reporters, one of whom had broken a story involving the University of Virginia. And that University of Virginia story involved emails that reporter had FOIA'd and gotten. Not to say that was complex, but it was a good story. It was a good story, and they laid off that particular journalist. And I thought to myself, wait a minute, there didn't seem to be any rhyme or reason for who got canned. And it didn't seem to be any relationship between whether or not those people were good journalists or not. That didn't seem to matter. We're just getting rid of you, and that's pretty much it.
Of the entity, the institution, the journalism, the legacy, right? So I really want to understand from you what happened.
Right.
We had a conversation after your book came out on my PBS show. We talked for 30 minutes about how God, it was so great. You know, didn't know what it was going to be like, but it turned out he was so supportive, and I mean, a total change.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, he was a good owner, and I liked working for him, and I liked him, actually. He set out a clear strategy for the Post, which was very ambitious, that we should be no longer essentially a regional news organization with sort of covering politics at the national level, but that's about it.
Yeah.
He said we needed to be truly national, we needed to be international. We lived in a digital era. This gave us the opportunity to distribute our journalism everywhere around the country and everywhere around the world. And we should take advantage of that. And he was willing to invest in that. And he asked us to come up with a lot of initiatives. He laid out a clear strategy in that way. And then subsequent to that, we had a clear mission. And that's sort of implicit in the motto that we came up with, which was democracy dies in darkness. And he actually didn't call it a motto. He didn't want to call it a motto, call it a mission statement.
Mission.
And he supported us and he defended us against, I mean, when we were covering Trump in 2015, when Trump entered the political landscape, Trump hated our coverage, of course, and he attacked Bezos. He knew he wasn't going to get anywhere just attacking us.
Right.
Okay, we're going to go forward a little bit here.
Had already established relationships, very good relationships with the Defense Department, the intelligence.
But didn't he proactively, Marty, as I remember you telling the story, when he arrived, he said, cover me?
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't care.
He never interfered. He never interfered in our coverage. He said, you can cover Amazon, you can cover me like you cover anybody else. He never interfered at all in our coverage. And even though obviously it made an enemy out of Donald Trump. So what I think happened is that he thought Trump was gone. Like a lot of people thought Trump was gone. And hey, he like rose again, you know, and he was back. And 11 days before the election in 2024, Bezos made the decision not to run an editorial presidential endorsement. The staff, the opinion staff, which I wasn't associated with because I was in the news department, they had prepared one for Kamala Harris, and he killed it. And he said they weren't going to be doing presidential endorsements ever again, even though in the two previous presidential races they had editorialized against Donald Trump, even to the point of saying he was like one of the worst presidents ever in the history of the
Yeah.
United States. So he feared, I think, reprisals from.
Oh, the moment that the Washington Post dies is that decision, that late 2024 decision by Jeff Bezos not to endorse Kamala Harris. Whether you like Kamala Harris or not, that was the wrong decision. They should have endorsed somebody. And that was a complete punk out. That was when they lost 300,000 subscribers. That was the absolute beginning of the end. There's no doubt about that.
SpaceX, which it had fallen way behind SpaceX, that would be completely, largely dependent upon government contracts, and that Trump could have denied contracts to that. And so he felt he needed to repair his relationship with Donald Trump, and he set about doing that first with the cancellation of the editorial, then appearing on the stage during the inauguration, then acquiring the Melania, quote, documentary.
Yeah.
But it was clear signal that he wanted to move it to the right. And so I think that's what's happened. I don't believe the cuts are an effort, sort of something that he promised Donald Trump or anything like that. I think there are probably other reasons for that.
So when you
Yeah, well, but the problem with thinking that is that Bezos is a multi-billionaire and has plenty of money to support the Post financially if he wanted to, if he cared about journalism. He's not doing that. He's cutting people as if, it matters in his bottom line, which it doesn't. And that, friends, is really interesting because what that tells you is that he really doesn't care about journalism or the paper. And this is why I think the Post is dead. This is why I think it's over. It really is over.
referred in your statement following the cuts to, this was your quote, sickening efforts by Jeff Bezos to curry favor with Trump. You were not referring to these cuts as such an effort.
No, what I was referring to there is
all the preceding
all the preceding stuff that actually, look, they're in a hugely challenged environment, and the media environment is really difficult. I mean, difficult is an understatement. I mean, it's incredibly tumultuous. A lot of changes. I mean, just in the last 3 years with generative AI, that has changed the media environment dramatically. And so the Post faces all those challenges. It was losing money. They had overspent, I believe, at the time, just after I left.
Realize the New York Times is dealing with the exact same challenges, and somehow the New York Times figured it out. So think about the news platforms that are making money, that have figured out how to deal with AI and all this other stuff and all these media changes. And there's many news organizations that are making money. The Bulwark, Zateo, The Contrarian, Punchbowl, what is the one, the Free Press, Barry Weiss's. I mean, these people are all making money. So I'm not buying this, AI came and disrupted everything. Some people have figured that out. The Washington Post should have been able to figure it out as well.
The opinion pages, and that probably has been a slow decline.
Yeah. So you said that there's no plan. There has not been an announced plan for the Post going forward. Actually, the statement that Jeff Bezos did make following the cuts, I at least took it to be a statement of what he believed, at least in principle, might be a driver. Our readers give us a roadmap to success. The data tells us what is valuable and where to focus. This is Jeff.
In other words, wherever the traffic is where we're going to go, which was really similar to what Will Harris said, which was, if we get a lot of traffic on this, we're going to put more energy into it. Remember, they cut the metro section at the Post because the metro section wasn't getting traffic. It's not that the metro section isn't important. Wasn't getting traffic, so now it's not important. So importance is based on how many readers we have. It's a dangerous game because there's a lot of things in life that are important that don't get a lot of attention for one reason or another. I mean, obviously that Vanity Fair piece that came out on Jeffrey Epstein, what was it now, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, that was important and it didn't get a lot of attention. Turns out it was really important. So I don't know about judging things based on pure traffic and then that's it.
Bezos talking about the strategy for the Post going forward. What do you think about that?
Well, first of all, it wasn't all that inspirational. And I would say that I could get more inspiration out of a, message in a fortune cookie, but
you could say that.
I could say that. In fact, I just did. Look, I mean, It's weird. I mean, look, you have to have metrics to run a business. You have to have data. It's incredibly important. But you got to know who you are.
Right.
What is your own identity?
Right.
What is your mission? And that suggests that, well, we don't really know. We'll let the data tell us.
Give them what they want.
Sure, and it's like saying we're going to set sail and we'll let the winds tell us where we're supposed to go, and then you crash on the rocky shore. And as opposed to saying, no, this is the destination. This is where we want to go, and we're going to use the wind to help us get there. And
that's exactly right. And you see all of these publications that are doing really well online: Midas Touch, Contrarian, Bulwark, Roland Martin Unfiltered, Don Lemon, Joy Reid, the ones that are getting all this traffic, Tyler Cohen. I mean, this is because I have decided what I'm going to talk about. You either like it or you don't. And I don't care if you don't like it. I don't care if you don't agree. Same on the right. Same with the channels on the right. They say who they are, and that's it. And we're doing that. And that's what we're talking about. No apologies. The Post has no idea who they are, what their identity is, and what the plan is. None whatsoever.
And so I think it was an uninspired statement. And what they need to do, one of the things they need to do is indicate to the staff, signal to the staff, here's where we want to go. Here's who we are. In the same way that Bezos did it when he first bought the Post.
And by the way, not just to the staff, but to us as readers.
Absolutely.
Right? If we're going to stick with the paper, it'd be nice to know what the plan is.
How about that?
Well, you can to support it.
To support it.
In any event, yeah. I mean, at the time they announced these layoffs, he was not on the Zoom with the staff. It was just the executive editor, Matt Murray, and the HR person. And it turned out, and apparently Matt told people that, I don't know, Will Lewis, the CEO, had other things to do. And it turned out that actually a former reporter, a sports reporter for the Washington Post, who now works for The Athletic, which is part of the New York Times, captured Will Lewis in San Francisco at the NFL honors ceremony on the red carpet while the staff was being laid off.
Right.
I guess he thought that was leadership.
Well, I want you to characterize.
Terrible.
In all seriousness, characterize his tenure, because he was a controversial figure, certainly.
Tenure was terrible.
Of course we do. But he announced a third newsroom. The weird thing was that nobody knew what the second newsroom was.
Replace him was the CFO, Jeff D'Onofrio, who had been formerly running Tumblr. Is that right?
Yeah, that was one of his previous.
Things.
Yeah. About they were going to continue the print edition. That should be coming from a publisher, not from the editor. And look, I mean, the coverage has been really good. I mean, they've done some great things. I mean, they've done a lot to hold this administration accountable. I mean, look, they had a great story just like a day or two before the announcement about the administration's use of administrative warrants as a way of intimidating people who were
asking this a question because I know the answer. You're supportive of the journalism despite all
the news department. The editorials.
Well, I asked this because in the time after the cuts, there's been this discussion of basically who lost the Post, who is responsible for this, and there's been.
Oh my God, it's Will Lewis. That's not even a question. That's obviously Will Lewis, and that's a foolish question to ask. I mean, you can't really. I wouldn't say it. You could say it was Bezos, but I would say that was Will Lewis. Thanks. Portsmouth Coffee Talk, by the way, for being a member of this channel. I appreciate it. This is probably a good time to stop and say that I do own an independent media platform other than this YouTube channel. And that is Black Virginia News. So we're being unapologetic here. This is covering the Black community in Virginia, which is 20% of the population. There will be no half-stepping, as Big Daddy Kane would say. This is we're fully like stepping into covering the Black community without apology. Portsmouth, of course, is part of that community, and news is not easy to cover. But when you start getting granular and local, it's a lot funner and it's a lot more interesting than I think what we see with AI slop and everything else. But at any rate, Black Virginia News is on Substack. I want to thank Substack, too, for making it very easy to make money with a smaller platform. And that's why I'm mad at the Washington Post, because I'm like, look, if you can't make money and you got all these subscribers and all all these resources and a 100-year-old reputation. I'm not sure why it is that you should be in business if you can't figure out how to pull that off. That's on you. And that was Will Harris. He had no idea what he was doing. And I think the other guy, Mike Murray or Mark Murray, whatever his name is, has no idea what he's done. I mean, these people don't have any idea what that. We've seen it before. We've seen it before where they've hired people who are trying to make money in the news business and they couldn't do it. And they struggle with it, and there's no plan. And you got to have a plan. Even if the plan fails, at least have a plan. The plan should be based on, quite frankly, what everybody else does that makes money. It's not that hard to figure out that people are creating original content and they're walling it off behind a paywall. And that's what it is. And they're doing that really well. And then they're targeting their readership to a very exclusive audience. And they're making money doing that. Like the idea that there's some big mysterious thing that's going on, it really isn't that mysterious. But Mike Murray and Will Lewis couldn't figure it out, and I think ended the Washington Post. That's what happened. They ended the Washington Post.
Jeff Bezos is responsible. Will Lewis is responsible. The president is indirectly responsible because he was the one who set us all on a course of undermining faith and confidence in institutions like the Post, and that's hobbled the Post and others. Jerry Baker, the former editor-in-chief of the Wall Street Journal, wrote a column the other day blaming the Post's journalists and journalism for this. This is what he wrote. The president's attacks on the media are indefensible and troubling, but it never seems to occur to his targets that the primary reason he gets away with them is that faith in the honesty of these institutions has already been devastated by their own tendentious work. His view is that the journalism of the Post is bad enough, biased enough, that's why the paper has been in trouble, and that was the cause of the distress we saw on the 4th.
Yeah, I actually buy into some of that theory. I know Marty Baron's going to push back real hard on that one. He's going to push back real hard on that one. Let's see what he says.
Right. I read that column. And as you were citing it here, I was rolling my eyes. You couldn't see that, but I'll let you know I was rolling my eyes.
Noted.
And it's ridiculous. I mean, it's ridiculous. First of all, I mean, when Jerry was the editor of the Wall Street Journal, I always called him my best recruiter because we got so many talented journalists from the Wall Street Journal because under his leadership, they felt they couldn't write the truth, okay, of what they knew about the Trump administration. And incredibly talented people, some of whom now work for the Atlantic. I mean, look, I mean, the Post did its job. It held the administration accountable. It's the reason why, by the way, people decided to subscribe to the Post. We went from when Bezos acquired us in October of 2013. We had just started a paywall, you know, asking for people to pay for access digitally, and we had 35,000 subscribers. By the time I left, we had almost 3 million subscribers to the Washington Post. Our traffic at one point exceeded that of the New York Times. And they came to us because...
Yeah, he's right. He has good numbers, no doubt about it. It is funny that he swats away the question about any sort of political, any sort of political leanings. I think what happens in these newsrooms is people are talking, talking to their friends and talking to people who agree with them, and maybe he spent his entire day talking to Cameron Barr. I don't know, or Mike Semmel, but it's like they don't see their bias. They don't see it. And it's not until you are in a situation, as I was, where you're talking to different media organizations, where you really see the bias in the coverage. And particularly if you're a communications director for somebody and you're the communications director and you can see the level of bias from one news organization to the next, and they don't get to see that. Like Marty Baron sitting in the newsroom doesn't get to see all of the other news organizations and how they report a story and what questions they ask and what questions they don't ask and what they avoid covering and what they hide and what they put out there. He doesn't see that. A crisis manager would see it. A communications director would see it. A press secretary would see it. But I'm not sure that the executive editor of the Washington Post would see it because that's just not his world. He's talking to reporters all day or talking to his managing editors all day. So I just think that every time this comes up, everybody in the news industry doesn't want to talk about bias one way or the other. They all want to pretend that there is no bias and we're fair and we're objective. And it's all complete nonsense. And I'm not sure why in the world people don't think it's complete nonsense. So it is complete nonsense. But again, it's an exhaustive discussion just to talk about that. But man, it amazes me how they don't see themselves. They don't have the ability to step outside of themselves and see what they look like.
They've had confidence in the work that we did. You know, it's interesting. More recently, the current editor of the editorial page of the Post, he suggested that somehow this growth was all because of partisanship, that they came to us out of for partisan reasons. And you know what they really, it's so wrong to think that way. They came to us because they were worried that a president, that Donald Trump would abuse his power as president. They felt that somebody like that needed to be held accountable. They felt that the press had a critical role to play under the First Amendment of holding a president like that accountable, a president who was the most powerful person in the world. And they felt that the Post was doing an excellent job at that. And so then they...
Yeah, and then they all left in droves, 200,000 people, when they figured out the Washington Post was full of you-know-what, when Jeff Bezos didn't endorse Kamala Harris for president. So it works both ways. They came to the Post because of Trump. I think he makes a good point there, but then they leave because the Post, having no identity, decides to not endorse the obvious candidate. I mean, if you're a fan of the First Amendment, there's no way that you're endorsing Donald Trump. So what the hell was that? And that makes absolutely no sense.
Supported the Washington Post. And I don't call that partisanship. I call that citizenship. That's understanding the role of the press in this country.
Yeah.
And they further understood the role of the press in the country when Bezos stopped the endorsement of Harris, and they realized that they'd been punked. They'd been punked by the Post. Post had no identity and wasn't even really having an identity of protecting the First Amendment, which makes no sense, because at the very least, the Post should have been, wait a minute, we can't endorse Donald Trump, who's been attacking the media and attacking the First Amendment, attacking the Constitution more broadly. They lost their identity in that moment, and that's why they lost 200,000 subscribers. That was a absolute disaster when Bezos did that. It was totally against brand, totally against what the Post has stood for, in the name of the Pentagon Papers and Watergate, and that was an absolute disaster.
A couple of times when we've been together over the last couple of years, I've said to you, you know, young people I worked with at one point, or people who call me and ask for advice professionally, would say to me, I've got an opportunity to go to the Post. Should I go? And I asked you, what do you say to people, given your history with the Post, given what you've just observed? And you always said to me, unhesitatingly, I tell them to still go to work for the Post.
Yeah.
Do you still tell a kid who calls you under these circumstances, take the job at the Post?
Well, nobody's called me lately, but the...
Should we run the simulation? I mean,
you could.
I'll be a young person,
young,
you be you. Exactly, right.
I don't like that. I'll be the young person. You
Okay,
be you.
yeah.
So,
but what would you tell, seriously, a young journalist who thinks,
go.
I've got an opportunity
Of course, go. I think that they're going to continue to do good work.
No way. You know, I actually met Marty Baron at Politics and Prose, and he was doing his book tour. And I walked up to him and, of course, said, hey, you know, I dealt with the Post a lot because I was Justin Fairfax's communications director in 2019. And obviously, we thought that the coverage was not the greatest, but, you know, we had our differences. I didn't lean into him really hard or anything like that. I just was really just saying hello. I'd never met him before. And I wasn't like trying to be, you know, an ass or anything, but I just, you know, told him who I was, and he was like, oh, you know, like I was gonna do something, but I didn't. I wasn't rude or anything like that. But when they did there was a Q&A portion of that Politics and Prose Marty Baron moment, and I got up and asked him a question. It's kind of on par with what he was just talking about, which is what makes me think about it. You know, the question was basically if T. Reece Shapiro could exist at the Washington Post today. T. Reece Shapiro was a reporter who dismantled the UVA rape case story. And there was a lot of analysis that went into that. Incidentally, Karen Tumulty was the moderator of this event at Politics and Prose. And the reason that that's interesting is because Karen Tumulty wrote several I would argue, unhinged columns on Justin Fairfax without even calling us. Finally, I had to email her, and then she called. To her credit, I emailed her, and then she did call. But before she called, she wrote 2 columns without really knowing what she was talking about. And I, called and said, "Hey, Karen, you don't know this entire story. Like, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing out there?" And anyway, he was doing his book tour, Collision of Power. And I get up on the line. Politics and Prose has a very nice program when they have authors in, and you get to ask the author's question. Obviously, you get to have your book signed at the end, but they have a very nice Q&A portion of the program. So I got in the line and I asked him about T. Reed Shapiro, because my view of it is, given the politics and the dynamics of these newsrooms, particularly the legacy newsrooms, you cannot have a T. Reed Shapiro. T. Reed Shapiro would have been shut down in this newsroom of today. And that's just my theory, and I'm sticking to it. I just think there's no way he would have been allowed to pursue the angle that dismantled the UVA rape story, which was basically that the whole thing was a lie, right? As we found out in court. And he dismantled it by just doing basic journalism. I actually think that, the progressive editors and staff in the Post would have stopped him from doing that in the world that we live in today. He would not have been able to go out to Charlottesville and ask a bunch of questions. But this is me asking Marty Baron about T. Reed Shapiro.
I don't know.
Yes, ma'am.
Marty, great book. I really appreciated and how you doing, Karen? Really appreciated how you went through a lot of the Me Too reporting that the Post has done. I wondered, given the social pressure in one direction, do you think that the Post that you left can do the type of reporting that you saw from Emily Yaffe and Reason with regard to John Kamen, and Jane Mayer, which she did with Al Franken? Do you think it can be reported that way from the Post, given so much of the social dynamics and the political dynamics that have that reporting going in the other direction? Thank you.
Yeah, well, I have a whole chapter on the Me Too stories. They're the single toughest stories that I've ever dealt with. They're really hard because you want to do justice for real victims of abuse and assault, but you also want to be fair to people who've been accused. And there are huge risks for news organizations as well, because there's a risk if you don't highlight real abuse, because other people will be abused. There's a risk if you actually end up falsely accusing somebody, because that person's life can be completely destroyed. Their whole career can be destroyed. And by the way, they might actually file a libel suit against you, and it's going to cost you a lot of money. And so it's really hard. So you have to have a set of standards to say, okay, what's the threshold that we require in order to publish? Have we demonstrated that we've done a diligent job here as much as we can? One of the standards that I talk about in the book that was really important for us in deciding whether to publish or not is that at least one victim, typically a woman, had to be identified, had to come forward and identify herself. And I know that there are huge risks in doing so.
Now, that's interesting that he said that, because I actually got the feeling, dealing with the Post as a crisis manager, they had no standards. That the standard was basically, if we feel like doing this, we'll do it. Like, there didn't seem to be a standard of evidence at all in the case of Justin Fairfax, because there was no evidence. There's literally no evidence. These people came in with no evidence, just hot air talking. That was it. And they got in the paper. So it's interesting that he says that someone has to come forward, because both of the accusers of Justin not only had multiple allegations against other people with no evidence attached to those allegations either, but they also did not come forward as themselves. They came forward as attorneys in the form of Deborah Katz and Nancy Smith. So it's not like they talked to the paper. And one of the biggest problems I had with the Post reporting was, I later found out that they never actually spoke directly with the 2 accusers of Justin Fairfax. They never actually interviewed them before putting into the paper something that destroyed his entire reputation in life, right? So they had the one person that they never talked to. I can't find any evidence that they actually ever talked to one of them. And then the other one they spoke with, and then decided not to do the story a year prior, because she had no evidence, no corroboration, no nothing, which was the correct journalistic decision. She had no corroboration over 13 years, hadn't said anything to anybody. And then all of a sudden pops up when Justin gets elected, right? And then they never talked to her again. they never interview her again. And at first I did not know that because the Post is not telling me any of this, right? This would be prosecutorial misconduct if this was a legal matter in front of a set of attorneys who are prosecutors, and you're trying to, say prosecute somebody. One of the rules and one of the standards they should have is do not put anything in the paper unless the person has gone to the police. If they can go to the newspaper, they can go to the police. If they can talk to the Washington Post, they can talk to the police. See, so many of these cases, the person is so happy to be talking to journalists, but somehow is never talking to the authorities. And the reason for that, I think, is glaringly obvious. There are consequences if you lie to the authorities. There are no consequences if you lie to the media. The media knows that. And the people who tell these stories know that. The people who tell these stories and who are not necessarily telling the full truth. So I found it so interesting he said something about standards, because I could detect no standards in what they were doing whatsoever. And I had been the crisis manager for 2 different individuals, and I saw no standards, no set standards in either case.
Understand why women would not want to do that, but that we required at least that. And the same is with the New York Times, by the way. Those original Me Too stories, if you've read the book She Said, and if you've watched the movie She Said, the thing that they were emphasizing that we need somebody to go on the record. We need, and they wanted more than one, certainly, to go on the record. And
now I'm glad he brought up She Said. That was an excellent book by Jodi Kantor and Megan Twohey. 2 Me Too reporters, of course, they start the Me Too part of their reporting with the Harvey Weinstein case. They did unbelievably good reporting on that. It took a long time because they had to go to people's houses, knock on people's doors. They had to do all sorts of stuff that was just shoe leather reporting that, frankly, I think 90% of the Me Too stories have none of that. I think Jane Mayer is the only other person I think of that really goes deep and will, call 20, 30 people and all that. But anyway, She Said was a great book. But somebody getting on the record on something doesn't mean they're telling the truth. That's the part that I think the media is not figuring out. Just because somebody's on the record doesn't mean that they're telling the truth, because, they're on the record. And they do have this sort of obsession with, if you told us first person and gave us your name, then that must mean that you're legit. And I'm thinking, what? And in this narcissistic environment that we live in, where people want attention and people live in the internet age and the Facebook age, where they want their face on everything and they want their name on everything and they'll do anything to get it. You got to have something else. You got to have, to me, real-time corroboration, an email that you sent to somebody in real time, a text message you sent somebody in real time. And women, we talk all the time. So I'm always surprised when they publish a story where the accuser doesn't have any of that. Nothing. You don't have an email that just says, oh my God, you're not going to believe what just happened. Meet me at the corner. You don't have to have every little detail of what happened. I'm not saying that, but some indication that something happened. And the 2 accusers of Justin Fairfax had nothing. I literally had nothing. And their stories got right into the Washington Post. It was amazing.
There are some ways that you can circumvent that if you find, for example, documents, a court document or something like that, or you find a non-disclosure agreement that actually identifies who committed the abuse and what the abuse or assault was, that sort of thing. So there are other ways where somebody doesn't necessarily have to go on the record, but you need something more definitive. And
so, I mean, I don't know about his answer. I'll get to you in a second. Forensic accountant just left me a message. I'll get to you in a second. This answer is really good, though. He is giving me a long answer. I'll commend him for that. He knew who I was, because before this little session started, I did tell him I was Justin Fairfax's comms director. Karen Tumulty actually knows who I am. She's probably really like, oh my God, I can't believe this person's about to take the mic. She does know who I am. We talked before on the phone and in person, and she probably remembers that I worked for Justin. But these people made a huge mistake on Justin Fairfax, a massive mistake, in rushing something into the paper, competing probably with the Times and so many others, wanting to look like they were doing a Me Too story that involved an elected official. And I get that that's, oh my God, ooh, it's elected official. And I'm sure their attorneys told them, oh, it doesn't matter if he sues. He's a public official. He'll never be able to win a defamation case. I think Jay Kennedy and John McLaughlin are their attorneys at the Post. But man, they made a huge mistake in the reporting, a huge, huge mistake.
It is really hard. And I've been criticized, as I point out in the book, from every side. I've been criticized for publishing stories, and I've been criticized for not publishing stories. And I expect that that'll be the case for anybody who's in charge of that kind of coverage at the Washington Post.
I want to congratulate you on the turnaround at the Washington Post. I wasn't aware of.
I thought I'd asked about T. Reed Shapiro. I guess I didn't. I thought I asked about T. Reed Shapiro. I brought up Jane Mayer and somebody else. So at any rate, this is Politics and Prose. This is Upper Northwest Washington, D.C., which is all houses. And you can see a lot of older people in the crowd. Nothing wrong with that. People need to read books, so this is a good thing. And they do have this Q&A. The Q&A is just really good. You can really get a question or two in there. And, this was me asking Marty Baron. So let me go back to the Atlantic for a second and finish up with that. And before let me see now, boom, this. Okay, yes, I got a question in here about notifications. Because your Made for Kids option is selected. I didn't know that my Made for Kids option was selected. Can't receive notifications related to your posting or broadcast. So I am going to change that. I'd be shocked if that, you know what? Maybe like when you do a live, you've got to go in and toggle and change the thing that you check. So thanks for telling me about that, because I did not know that Made for Kids was on. That makes no sense that it would be on, but I will go and change that because it shouldn't say Made for Kids.
With fewer resources, they still have very talented people. I think it's an honor for any young journalist to work among them and to learn from them, and to contribute to making the Post as good as it possibly can be. And they can do tremendously important work. So talented young people, if they have the opportunity to go to the Post, I believe they should go.
You should, yeah. Let's talk for a moment about what's lost as a consequence of these cuts. There's been a lot of focus on the loss of Metro coverage, right? Today, the Baltimore Banner announced they were going to get into the business of covering Washington, D.C. sports in particular, given the fact that the sports coverage is disappearing. They've also announced previously they're going to go into Prince George's County to try to make up for some of the loss of the suburban coverage. There's been discussion of whether someone should start a nonprofit news organization to cover Washington, D.C., much like what has happened in other places where news deserts have been created. Nonprofit news rushes in to fill that void. There's been some thought about people attempting to buy the Post from Jeff Bezos. I gather he's not interested in.
My understanding is that there have been at least a couple of overtures, and he's rejected.
He's rejected.
Exactly.
What does Washington, D.C. do now? If you're a resident of Washington, D.C. and you're losing all of this stuff, what's the answer?
Well, I hope somebody does come in to provide the coverage. I think it's a good idea that the Banner has now decided to cover Washington sports teams. I actually just met this morning with Bob Cohn, who's the CEO of the Banner.
They're good.
Terrific. They're doing a great job. And he told me that this was coming up, and I thought it was a great thing. And they'll be hiring some incredibly talented, probably, sports journalists.
Possibly from the Post.
From the Washington Post. They couldn't do better than to hire for the.
Wow.
A good portion of Maryland and move in. And there have been some people who've talked about doing that.
Journalism meeting the moment. Leave the question of the Post to the side. It's dangerous to describe as you see.
Incredible amount of great coverage, including from work. Independent journalists have done great work. There's been a lot of fantastic work. We know so much about what's happening behind the scenes and beneath the surface of this administration, which is really the job of journalists to do. And
he is so trying to be optimistic about, oh my God, the people who are there and they're doing so great and blah, blah. And, everything's cool and independent journalism is great. Baltimore Banner is fantastic, actually. I mean, he's right about that. But I am like, come on, man. Come on. You know damn well if you cut half the people in the newsroom, that's going to have an impact. That's going to have an impact on the journalism. There's no getting around it, And Somebody's got a Justin Fairfax comment, so I got to go to that. Okay, forensic accountant. Um, Nothing more valuable, by the way, than a forensic accountant at this time of year during tax season. I was present at Fort Comfort for the 400th commemoration of the 1619 landing, where Justin Fairfax gave his family origin speech. All in attendance felt the brother Fairfax was next, definitely. Yeah. Well, as somebody who worked for him, I was there as well at Fort Comfort. It was August of 2019. We went to Mango Mango right after that, which I've heard Mango Mango is they're doing catering, black-owned business in Phoebus and Hampton, Virginia. They're now doing all catering, and now they are just doing their catering. I think the restaurant part is being dismantled. But going back to the commemoration at Fort Comfort, the 400th commemoration of the slaves coming in, which of course could be in the book 1619, and that history, of course, is all captured in Hampton. As somebody who worked for him and, of course, knows more detail than the normal person, I believe he was set up. He, of course, was on the precipice of being the governor of Virginia as Ralph Northam was reeling in a scandal. And just at that moment, realized Justin Fairfax had been involved in Virginia politics since 2013 when he ran for attorney general. Ran for attorney general in 2013 and almost beat Mark Herring. Came very close, but did lose. And nobody heard anything. Nobody knows anything. He then runs again, announces he's going to run for lieutenant governor in 2016 rather than attorney general. Nobody hears anything, nothing. And he wins, of course, in 2017 against Jill Vogel, who then was a state senator, very wealthy state senator. I think it's oil money for the Vogel family. They live in Loudon. At any rate, Justin Fairfax was in office for what actually happens is the Washington Post calls our office 5 days before inauguration day. I shouldn't say our office because we didn't have an office. He was the lieutenant governor elect. They call 5 days before inauguration day with a Me Too allegation. It suddenly is coming in after all this time that Justin has been, in office. This is 2018. So the inauguration for Ralph Northam and Justin Fairfax and Mark Herring was, I think it was the 8th. No, it was the 11th, January 11th, 2018. Justin wins in November 2017. But what ends up happening is the Post investigates, that's in fat quotes, for 3 months, drops the story because they know there's no evidence, no proof of anything this person is saying. And this person had been talking quite openly about her father violating her as a child. She'd been talking about that for about 20 years. And all of that is in the public domain, very easy to find. And I pointed that out to the Post. I said, don't you find it interesting that this person is claiming all of this? She's talking about her father constantly. She's talking about the subject matter of sexual violence all the time, but never mentions that anything happened with some stranger in 2004 at the Democratic National Convention. She can mention all these other things. She can talk about all this other stuff. She can talk about her father. You want to talk about some touchy, intimate subjects that would be hard to discuss? That would be one. Absolutely. I mean, but she's talking about it in public, and she's setting up a speakers bureau to talk about it in public, which she did, yet never mentions anything about something happening in 2004. That didn't make any sense to me at all, particularly with somebody who had no power over her. Didn't make any sense. So the Post didn't know about any of that. they hadn't even, I don't even think they did a Google search on this accuser, much less investigate. But at any rate, they had talked to a fair amount of people because the people had come back to us and said, you're not going to believe what they're asking about. And Teresa Vargas was the reporter, which really, which I think she's still with the Post in the opinion section. Teresa Vargas is not an investigative reporter, so that made my blood run cold because I was like, at least pick somebody like Carol Lenning or somebody that does investigative reporting. Teresa Vargas was doing features, like these light features, and I thought that's not the type of reporter that should be delving into this type of subject matter. At any rate, as predicted, when you have a reporter who doesn't do investigation, she's asking people all these questions. They come back to us and say, you're not going to believe this. We spend all of 2018, which was the long session in Virginia. We spend, or I should say Justin spends January, February, and March on basically worried that he's going to get blown up in the media. And we knew who this accuser was because she had had a relationship with another elected official in Virginia, which was like another thing that was out there that everybody thought was just so not to be reported. At any rate, all of this with no evidence. And I kept saying the Washington Post, Teresa Vargas, Mike Semmel, Cameron Barr. I said to them, where is the evidence? You're putting stuff in the paper this serious. This is a serious crime that's being alleged. And you're going to put this in the paper with no evidence? With no evidence other than somebody talking. And this person went 13 years without saying anything. And then all of a sudden they pop up when somebody is becoming famous and in the act of becoming famous. So I thought that was crazy. That was not the journalism that I grew up in. I'll just say that. You don't publish things that you can't verify as true, period. And, and, you know, there was a lot of detailed information that they did not want to report because it was exonerating for Justin. And the politics in that newsroom were, we are not going to amplify anything that a black male says. I'm just going to say it because we in the newsroom have decided that he's guilty. We don't care if there's no evidence. I shouldn't actually, black men don't get very good treatment in these situations. We've known that historically since the dawn of the printed press, but white men didn't get treated all that great either. Al Franken, as you remember, was pushed to resign, Andrew Cuomo. So I'm not going to say they got a free ride in that sense, but the politics in that newsroom were, you don't question any women who have these allegations. If you question them, you are a rape apologist. You are pro-rape, and shut the hell up. I mean, that's what it was. And I'm saying to everybody, where's the evidence? She's been sitting around for 13 years not saying anything. Then she pops up and you guys put that in the paper with no evidence involved in that. I was like, no, that's not the journalism I came up in. That's all I'm saying. I started ABC News. There's no way unless we had real evidence of something. And what I mean real evidence, typically that would be a medical record, a police report. You could, of course, have something contemporaneous, a note to a friend, a text, an email, some phone calls, maybe some phone records of you calling a domestic violence crisis center. I mean, something, but to have no evidence whatsoever, and this gets in the paper, I got a major problem with that. Well, the year goes by, 2018, so they call us in January. The Washington Post calls us in January 2018, and they dropped the story in March of 2018 because the person doing the accusing, again, had no evidence. That entire year, I was telling everyone involved, this person is going to come out in some form because it was clear to me this is the subject matter she wants to talk about publicly. That had been evidenced previous to any of this. If you just did a Google search, you could see it. She wants to publicly be talking about this subject for whatever reason, whether it was what happened to her with her father or not, I don't know, because I'm not a clinician or a psychiatrist, but she had no problem talking publicly, but went 13 years and didn't mention Justin at all. That made no sense. So of course, what happens is Ralph Northam in February of 2019 gets in trouble because there's racist images in his yearbook. And that blows up in everybody's face. And all of a sudden, at that moment, this person pops back up again with this story, still having, of course, no evidence. And then all of a sudden, the second person that has had another allegation against somebody that, by the way, is famous from Duke University. See, Justin Fairfax was not just some student at Duke University. He was a very well-known student at Duke University. He was on the Duke Board of Trustees as a student trustee. He was in the Duke student paper a fair amount, and a well-known student at Duke, as was the other individual that one of Justin's accusers accused of rape, which was insane because she made that allegation the year before she alleges that Justin did something. So she had two allegations with no evidence from 1999 and 2000. And all of it got into the New York Times and the Washington Post. And so what it verified was if you show up and you just start talking, you get in the paper. You could get amplified nationally in the Washington Post. You don't need no evidence. You don't need no police records. You don't need medical records. You don't need phone records. You don't need diaries or text messages or anything contemporaneous. You get published in the Washington Post and the New York Times. And that's exactly what happened to Justin Fairfax. And to me, the reason it happened was the politics of Me Too were progressives in the newsroom. We believe women, period, end of story. That's what it was. I mean, that's just what it was. Like, it's as simple as that. Like, we believe based on, we just believe. They basically had adopted in the newsroom the ethos of domestic violence advocates. And while I think that's incredibly noble work, it's incredibly important work, it's incredibly difficult work, that is not what journalism is. Journalism, you're supposed to check the facts. You're supposed to have evidentiary process of some type before you publish something. But the fact of the matter is, and I'll end with this with regard to Marty Baron and everything else, is that these newspapers were losing money big time. Okay. And when you're losing money in the news industry, you get desperate. And when you get desperate, you start doing things to get traffic. Web traffic becomes the most important thing more than anything, because you're running that traffic and the ads on the page are getting clicked based on how much traffic is coming through that web page. And what we saw in the Me Too situation was that they didn't care whether or not stuff was accurate. They just cared that somebody is saying it, we're putting it in the paper, because that type of sensational material is going to get a lot of traffic. And so with Justin, his situation, which I think happened mostly because the media really can't handle two things at the same time. So frankly, Ralph Northam was saved by this distraction of what happened with Justin, because the theory was, well, we can't have this lieutenant governor because he's got this whole controversy. So I guess we have to keep Ralph Northam. That was sort of what happens there. And of course, it didn't matter that the Ralph Northam thing was provable. I mean, those pictures were on his yearbook, period, end of story. They were there. Whether he remembers them, whether he was one of the people in the photo or not, those pictures were there. That's just a fact. That's an evidentiary fact that in that yearbook, there's a picture of a Ku Klux Klan person and a person in blackface. That's a factual statement. With Justin's thing, there were no facts and evidence. There were no proven facts. There was nothing that could be established as a fact. There was just people talking, and based on people talking, anyone out there who knows the history of the work of Ida Wells, the work of anything during the height of lynching in the United States knows that you didn't need any evidence to adjudicate a black person in the American South. All you need is the allegation. That's it. And due process doesn't exist for black people in the American South and barely exists now today. In a lot of cases, you don't see that it exists now today. So the bottom line of all of that is that even when you have an Ivy League law degree from Columbia University, even when you're a prosecutor at the Department of Justice, even when your brother and your father went to Harvard University, Harvard Law School, even when you have an impeccable record of service, a stellar career in high school, Justin Fairfax had a stellar career in high school, much less college. Then he has a stellar career in college. You have all of those things. But the minute that somebody accuses you of something, in the eyes of the legacy press, and dare I say the legacy white press, in this case, it is the white press, the Washington Post and the New York Times, neither have been known for their diversity, neither have been known to care about injustice when it came to black people. Something like this happens and they put it in the paper with no evidence. And when we point it out, and then we start to show them documents that indicate that their reporting was absolutely incorrect, nobody cares. Mike Semmel, Cameron Barr, Marty Baron had been gone by then. Marty Baron was actually kind of, to me, a throwback to the Bradley era of the way you do journalism, but I think he was under a lot of pressure from people in the newsroom to report the story, because this is a progressive newsroom sourced by Upper Northwest DC and Alexandria and Arlington and McLean, Virginia, and the liberal area that is Northern Virginia, Washington, D.C., and Maryland, all Democratic blue areas. And you put that politics into something like this, and you will get very little fact checking and a lot of confirmation bias, which is exactly what they got. And the same thing happened with the UVA rape case. It was assumed those guys are guilty. You don't question women. Shut up. If you're questioning, you're a fan of sexual violence. Shut your mouth. If she said it happened, it happened. I mean, it was just, that's just what it was. And I wasn't even getting questions as to anything evidentiary, but we were presenting to them certain documents that should have been slam dunk, and they were acting like it didn't even exist. Because once a newspaper publishes a mistake, particularly a big one like this, they're not coming back and correcting that. Okay, they're not. And the only thing that might get their attention is a lawsuit. But the fact of the matter is, since Time Sullivan, no elected official has won a defamation suit that I know of. I think it's virtually impossible. And they know that. Jay Kennedy, at that time, their attorneys were Jay Kennedy and John McLaughlin. They know that elected officials aren't going to win a defamation suit against the Washington Post. You're a public figure. You have no standing under the defamation laws as they stand right now. You're not going to be able to prove malice. That's virtually impossible. It doesn't matter that the Times didn't call us before putting this stuff in the paper. It doesn't matter that neither paper spoke to the accusers directly. They're speaking to the accusers' attorneys, but they weren't speaking to the actual people making the allegation, which is insane, but true. At first, I thought I didn't know whether or not that was true. And then I checked with a ton of people at both papers and found out it was. And it was just crazy. And they're never going to admit, they're never, ever, ever going to admit that they got it wrong. Ever. They're just never going to admit it. But to me, as somebody who watched that up close, to me, this entire thing was the death of journalism. And I find myself, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I'm going to say it. I'm going to say it. I find myself kind of wishing that the Post of right now existed back in 2019, the Post that's broken and missing 45% of their newsroom. Because if it had existed in 2019, Justin's life would not have been destroyed by them. They wouldn't have had the resources. They wouldn't have had the political inclination, because now they're leaning right. Their editorial page would not have had Karen Tumulty and Ruth Marcus assuming Justin's guilt without even talking to him, without even calling him, without even asking him any questions, without even talking to me, the comms director, nothing. That wouldn't have happened. They don't believe in due process or presumption of innocence. They believed in what the Me Too movement told them, and that's politics and not journalism. That's what this is. And Marty Baron is a smart guy, but he has no understanding of what it's like to get the phone call that could destroy your life and reputation, and know deep down that it didn't happen and it's not true, but not be able to do anything about it. And that's what happened to Justin Fairfax. As you can see, I'm primed for a Justin Fairfax episode. There's a lot of facts that should be on the table that the Post is well aware of and has been given and written to, and we wrote to a bunch of people, and I'm naming them, okay? Phallus over at the investigations. They had a guy that was investigating the buyout. A lot of these people are gone because they took the buyout. It tells you how unsustainable the business of journalism is, that so many of these people have left. But David Phallus now is the head of investigations. He hasn't written me back once, and he's never going to write me back. He's never going to write me back. It was so funny because his father died recently. I saw it on Facebook, and his father was a prosecutor. And I thought, dude, you grew up in a justice family and you don't know what due process is. But see, when it's some black guy that's a lieutenant governor of Virginia, nobody cares. There's nobody black in their newsroom to care. Kevin Merida is gone. Wesley Lowery is gone. John Capehart is gone. There's nobody in that editorial meeting to say, wait a minute, our country has had a history when it comes to black men that has been very negative in terms of assuming their guilt. Let's stop and think for a second. Let's really, really give this some thought about how we proceed. And by the way, it doesn't matter what the color of the accusers are, one of whom claims to be black, but I actually think she's not black, but that's just me. All right. There's no evidence that she is, even though, that was her big calling card, but I don't see any evidence she's actually black. So anyway, the point is, that's beside the point. The point is that the Post was playing politics and not journalism when it came to that particular Me Too story. I think the Post is a good platform generally, but they messed that up. That was based on people's opinions in the newsroom, people's feelings, people's first personal feelings. So Marty Baron, I don't think he's a bad dude, but he doesn't understand how it is to be on the other side of his work. And I know he did the stuff with Spotlight at the Boston Globe, excellent work once again. But you know, I'm telling you that when I say that this business is cratering and people are not being as thorough as they used to be, and I started in the 90s and I know what thorough looks like, I'm telling you, that's gone. People are putting stuff in the paper without fact checking, without really deep diving and checking, because they're racing Twitter and they're racing Instagram and they're racing this and they're racing that and they're rushing and they're not checking the facts and reading and checking the people who are making the allegation. You got a guy who's about to be governor of Virginia, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, he's accused of a violent crime. I mean, come on. The timing alone should have made people suspicious. The timing alone should have been like, wait a minute, really? He's been sitting around here all this time. He's 40 years old, and all of a sudden, this is just now coming out, and you never heard it before. That should have been a point of suspicion. That should have been something that made everybody say, wait, let's at least check. Who are these people making this allegation? They never even talked. The New York Times never even talked to the people directly. They're talking to the attorneys because one of the attorneys is basically a New York Times employee that I think has funneled them a lot of stories. And so they just trusted what she said and didn't question it. But that's not journalism. You're supposed to check. You're supposed to fact check. And when two people show up and have no evidence, they say this whole thing is so terrible and bad and crazy, yet they have no evidence of what they're saying. God, I hate that I'm quoting Clarence Thomas. I hate it because I can't stand Clarence Thomas. But in fact, it was a high-tech lynching. All you needed to do, you don't need the rope, you don't need the tree, you don't need any of that. All you need to do is put it on Twitter and make sure the Washington Post is dumb enough to publish it without a lot of checking and a lot of questions asked, and boom, you've destroyed somebody's life. It's as easy as that. And no one is going to go back at the Post or the Times and go back and check and say, hey, wait a minute. Let's make sure that was right. Let's make sure that was. Nobody's doing that. Nobody's doing that. Nobody. That is never going to happen. not from the institutions themselves. Might happen from a third party. Remember with the UVA rape case that they messed up, I think it was CJR, Columbia Journalism Review, that came back and did a whole big, Stephen Call did a whole big analysis of the UVA. How did they get it wrong and confirmation bias? But the Washington Post and the New York Times didn't do that. T. Reese Shapiro from the Washington Post was the one who uncovered the inaccuracy. But I think all of this happened because these papers are losing money. They're getting increasingly desperate. We got to put something salacious in to blow up the traffic. Oh my God, we got a Me Too story involving an elected official. Boom. That's in the paper. Like we're not, because we know he can't sue us and get us. So we can just put that in the paper. We get the money. Everybody gets fed, right? The attorneys that were on the case get their names in the paper and get more clients. The Washington Post gets their web traffic, right? The accusers get their 15 minutes of fame. They get their attention. Of course, they, since have completely disappeared, if you've noticed. And no cops, by the way, if you notice, there just happens to be no cops involved. Yeah, because cops know how to investigate this stuff, get to the bottom. Cops are a lot better at investigation than the journalists, and they've got more power than the journalists. It was only Justin Fairfax who kept saying, look, I want this investigated by the police. He kept saying that over and over and over and over again. I've never in my life seen a black man ask for an investigation and not get it. Well, you saw it in 2019 because he was asking again and again. Then the FBI shows up in 2022 and everybody shrugs their shoulders at the Washington Post and the New York Times. Barely reported it in the Washington Post. And then when they did, they treated it like a joke. To me, when I was working on that particular situation in 2019 to 2023-ish, I knew journalism was dead. I mean, once you start dislocating the journalism from verifiable fact, and once you stop protecting facts that are verifiable, it's over. There is no journalism. It is over. And I knew it. I said, these people are too careless. They're too reckless. They're putting stuff in the paper without verifying whether or not it's true. There is no journalism. And you got two people talking and they don't have nothing. They don't have an email from when this happened, a text from when this happened, nothing. And no contemporaneous friends saying, "Hey, this happened to me." Nothing. Literally nothing. And they got in the paper and they got national publicity. They got on CNN, NBC, the whole shebang, because the media doesn't care. The media doesn't care if it's true or not. The media just cares about traffic. We need traffic. We need people watching. We need to get people's attention. And TikTok and Instagram are beating them like a drum. They know that. And that is my story. I'm sticking to it. I'll probably do a Justin Fairfax episode with Stacey Brown, who has covered a lot of the Me Too subject matter. When you're in the Black community, you understand the differences between how you are covered. Though I will say, with all candor, a lot of the white males that were subject of Me Too cases got blown up as well. I mean, certainly Al Franken was a great example of that. I mean, so I'm not saying that, it wasn't friendly to them. If it wasn't for Jane Mayer writing that piece in the New York Magazine about Al Franken would have never been exonerated at all. But still, his political career was destroyed. He never recovered from that. He resigned and then never recovered. So, but the media doesn't care. The media is we just want that traffic. We want that traffic. We want you clicking. We want you clicking. And whatever makes you click, we are going to do it. And funny, because Jeff Bezos' statement after he laid off all these people at the Post basically said that. He basically said, we are going to pursue what gets traffic. I mean, they're saying what the strategy is. It's traffic. And then of course, it's the same basic strategy as Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and everybody else, which is, we need to put something in front of you that you are going to click and get obsessed about. I mean, that's just what it is. So that is my rant on Justin Fairfax. Trust me, when you see somebody's life get destroyed with zero evidence and zero police involvement. Now, I know I'm biased. I'm the daughter of a law enforcement person and have law enforcement in my family and several people in my life who are in law enforcement who are close to me. I am telling you, when I don't see cops, when I see the accused saying they want to be investigated, and I see the accusers running from the police, I know something's wrong. Because basically, look, we've seen it happen. And UVA rape case is a great example where someone was lying, but they weren't adjudicated. I mean, the liar in the UVA rape case, she got a civil penalty. I mean, she was sued civilly, as was UVA, and she lost. But they weren't thrown in jail because she lied. I mean, it was just okay, and she slinked off into obscurity, and then that was it. We don't generally prosecute people who lie about these types of things. We just don't. So when you see the accused begging for the police, that is the hugest red flag in the world. Because if you're telling the truth, why wouldn't you talk to the police? And also, if you can talk to CBS and the Washington Post, why can't you talk to the police? If you can talk to Gayle King, why can't you talk to the police? That never has made any sense, ever. So that's my rant, and I'm sticking to it. This is Lauren Burke. I want to thank the folks that passed by here. Thanks for the comments. There were a lot of red flags in that story, and it wasn't right what happened there. It just was not right. It's a really easy way to destroy somebody is to put that type of allegation in a paper. Very easy. In fact, I actually think it's the easiest way because you don't have to prove anything. That's baked into the cake. If I said you stole my car, I got to give the police the VIN number. The car has to be missing, all that, right? There's got to be something, but when you say that type of sexual violence crimes, you can just say that, provide no evidence, and you will get the same result as if you did provide the evidence in terms of being taken seriously. Now, to some extent, I get it. I get what Tarana Burke, no relation, was trying to argue. We had not in any time in history discussed the seriousness of sexual violence crimes. She's right about that. But unfortunately, what happened to the Me Too movement was a Black woman created it for all the right reasons, I believe. And then it was stolen by a bunch of white Hollywood actresses so that we could talk about Harvey Weinstein all day instead of talking about rank and file sexual harassment and sexual violence that happens all the freaking time and was, to me, more prevalent in terms of that pervasive problem. It definitely needed to be addressed. It definitely needed to be discussed. But you have to have due process. You have to have presumption of innocence, and you have to have some carefulness about that type of serious subject matter, because the fact of the matter is you will destroy somebody if you put something in the paper that is not accurate and there's no evidence around it, which is exactly what the Washington Post did. Okay, what anybody said under Marty Baron. And, you know, I have respect for him, but I'm telling you, it's very difficult to get people in the news business to admit when they've made a mistake. It's actually, I think, slightly close to impossible. Please hit the like button. I'll be back soon with something, probably something on the Guthrie case. I do a little bit of true crime on this channel because I am so closely connected to so many people in my life who have been in law enforcement and have relayed some of the terrible stories that have happened. And we know that there is a need to be concerned when people claim that there was a crime that happened. I'm not having any problem saying that, but what happened to Justin Fairfax was not right. It was just not freaking right. This is Lauren Burke. I'll be back soon. This is Lauren Live. I'll probably be on with Stacey Brown this week. Obviously, State of the Union is Tuesday. There's a lot to talk about. Thanks, everybody who's watching. I'm a little surprised that I had so many people because this is not a particularly exciting topic, but I'll be back soon. Thanks.
Somewhere. What's going on? Thank you. Are you watching now?
Yeah. No, I was watching when I left, but it's excellent. I love it. I love the traffic's blowing up. You were in Brooklyn last night. Where?
I was in Bushwick.
Okay, I have my grandmother's house is in Crown Heights.
Oh, yeah.
So when I saw you, I was trying to look at what the pizza place was to see where.
As soon as we got there, someone recognized the pizza place. They're like, we got to get out of here. Someone
Get
had
out. It was great.
blown up our spot.
Their show is freaking fantastic.
Thank you.
Love it. Love it, man. Love it.